Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with someone whose story is in my second book, 15 Conversations with Millionaires. The Truck in the Toolbox is something that had to be in there. And what we're going to talk about here is something that Greg and I have been looking forward to, is the pain in the real estate market. Because again, seller financing, creative sub two, all of these things that Greg or I have deployed over the years are coming. It's not all about price. I think a lot of people are fixated on a crash like last time, which my market fell 75%. I would argue that's very unlikely, very, very unlikely, but you can always find sellers in pain, and sometimes sub two and or seller financing is the answer. And I know, Greg, you have a lot of experience in both. So what you got?
Yeah. Very different time, obviously, than 2008 and 9. The mortgage market is healthy. Interest rates, people that got long-term debt at very low interest rates, there's a good portion of the market there. There are, institutional investors that are buyers now of assets. So there's a lot of things that are fundamentally different than 2008 and 9. Obviously the big one is low inventory, right? And you and I were always against the grain. There were a number of people calling for the housing crash in the pandemic because of, forbearance program, because of moratoriums on evictions, all those things. And we're like, no, there's no inventory. These mortgages are healthy, they're low interest rates, and the sellers, aren't necessarily motivated or have to sell at scale, like 2009 when you have strategic defaults and, bad loans and things like that. So this is a very different time. But what we did say was the housing market is all about affordability. People are buying payments. Yes. And as interest rates go up, the value of the house that you can buy goes down exponentially and incrementally, with the rates. And that's what's going to create a correction. That's what I've been calling for. You've been calling for, is a correction. I think it happened a lot quicker than both of us thought, in terms of rates going up and how quickly they've gone up. I mean, we're going to be looking at 6% here soon. It's already in the upper fives.
I think it's this week. Given what I see is happening in the treasury market, I'm going to talk to my mortgage guy on Wednesdays. We could be at 6% by Wednesday. It could go that fast.
So that's huge. So we've already seen what fives have done. Five has, generated massive price reductions all across the country. Now, again, some of these levels were exorbitant and just outrageous to begin with.
Pricing,
on average. When you look at averages in these markets, these are realistic price reductions. We're seeing days on market go up. We're seeing inventory go up in certain areas. It's not everywhere. Real estate's hyper local. Every market's different. And inventory levels are different in every market. But, the big ones, especially in the Sunbelt areas, you're starting to see major corrections happen there. Because of the affordability index, people just, can't buy. Builders are in trouble. They're not selling. Traffic's down. Open house traffic's down. You get into the sixes, then you're in major correction territory. And, that hopefully is where you'll see inventory levels really start to rise exponentially. And we need it. You need a correction because there's a lot of people that are priced out of the market. And, 5 and 6%, that's still a great rate if prices adjust accordingly, across the board and allow people to enter the market that have been priced out because there's no choices and, values have just gone through the roof. And, that's also going to create opportunities because there will be people that do need to sell that aren't going to be able to sell because they're going to lose all their equity when these prices adjust, 20, 30, 40%, which they will. And we're already starting to see. But they have great interest rates. So that's where that sub two opportunity comes in, and it works commercial and residential. You can do it with all kinds of properties.
Yeah. So I've never done a sub two. I've certainly done seller financing. I am actually marketing directly to sellers with more than 60% equity because I want to do a lending program that I've worked out with a non-QM lender. It's called a 50-40-10. Quickly, 50% first with the non-QM lender, 40% seller second, and then all I have to do is bring in 10%. I plan to buy units, apartments, houses. Again, you have to market to the seller who is because a lot of people can't say yes to that creative structure, right? If you got 10% equity, you can't say yes to that. So I'm doing specific marketing, working with my team in Fresno to do mailers and postcards. So I'm looking for those actively. I've done seller financing for the years. Again, you could get below normal rates. I have one at 0. I have a couple at 1%. Seller financing is awesome, either as first or seconds. But I want to talk to you about sub two. I've never done one. It's a weakness or an area of improvement that I need. I'm intrigued by the idea of doing sub two on either residential or commercial properties. Tell us some more, because you have done some.
I've done tons of them a lot of different ways. Some are just, you take the property subject to the existing mortgage. In other words, you take title to the property. So title transfers, you do a closing. where the deed gets recorded in your name, but the mortgage still stays in place in the homeowner's name.
Okay.
And you start making payments to the lender,
Mhm.
and you pay the insurance and taxes and all that.
Right.
But the title will transfer. Now that does trigger technical default, but the lender has to actually call that. And generally, if you're making payments, they don't. Some commercial, notes, they will pay more attention to it, but commercial lenders are more, apt to go ahead and let you take a property over. So assumable loans, that used to be a big thing in the past, was, especially with FHA, what are the military loans? VA loans, FHA, those used to be assumable at scale.
Yep.
Sometimes they are. In the commercial multifamily market, loans are largely assumable. But that's
usually it's a 1% fee, because I've actually assumed an apartment loan.
It varies depending on the lender, but that's a very different thing. So subject to is different. The loan stays with the borrower in their name. They're still on the hook for it, which can be a positive or it could be a negative for you and for them if something goes wrong. So if that person gets in trouble, files bankruptcy or whatever, that could booger up the mortgage and create some problems. If you have a problem, that could create a problem for that owner. But generally what you do is you just tell the owner, so this is your third bucket. So if you get somebody that responds and says, hey, I'd love to do this deal, but I can't, I don't have any equity, then you can say, okay, Mr. Seller, how about this? Why don't you deed me title to the property? The loan stays in your name. I'll pay the loan off. And then at some point, I'll either renovate it and sell it and then pay you off at that point, or I'll go ahead and just hang on to it and I'll refinance it at some point. And then that's when you get paid at some point down the road. So that's how a sub-2 works. You're taking title to the property, loan stays in their name, you take over the payments, insurance, all that. And you have a time period of, whatever, 1, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever you want to make it, that you pay them off. And
now when you just so people don't get confused, when you say pay them off, you mean basically refi them out. Oh yeah, pay off the mortgage, right?
Yeah, so the loan has to get paid. So you with that seller, obviously, you can make it whatever. You could say, hey, I'll just do this for the length of the loan, because if it's got a 2.5% interest, you want to live in the house. There's no reason to pay that off or refi it, right? I mean, it's just free money. So it's really up to you. You can do whatever. But if it's a flip, and I've done a lot of these where the homeowner wanted too much money for the house, or there wasn't enough equity. I said, look, why don't you deed me the house? I'll do the repairs. When it sells, you'll be out. You get paid for whatever, you want. The mortgage gets paid off and I keep the profit. And all I had to put up was the repair money. So I didn't have to come out of pocket for the purchase of the house and everything else. I just put up, the cost to close, and then the repair, money and things like that.
I think that's a very creative approach. Because again, I've never, as I've said 10 minutes ago or whatever, I've never done a sub-2. I'm learning, I'm expanding. I think, because again, if you're doing sub-2 in a house that you plan to own forever, that's a long time where you and the owner could mess each other up, right? They get in trouble. They probably can't buy again because the debt's in their name. They declare bankruptcy, buggers it up, to use your word, or you get in trouble, buggers them up.
And you can do it owner occupant, you can do it and say, hey, I'm going to live here. So it can be an owner occupant deal. It could be an investment deal. You put a renter in there. Yeah, it could be. And then, keep it long enough till you can either sell it, refi, whatever, to pay the mortgage off. You can do it in new construction. So if it's a tear down, or if it's a vacant lot and they have a note on it, you could come in and say, deed me the property, I'll tear it down, I'll bring the money to build the house. So all you have to bring is the money to build the house. You can borrow that, from a private lender. You can use your own cash. I've done that, many a times. And then once you get it built and sold or refinanced, whatever, that's when you pay the note off. And any premium that the seller might want or whatever. So you can do it a lot of different ways with a lot of different assets.
Yeah, I think that's because again, I'm always about being conservative. I don't need to put anything at rest that we've built over the last 20 years. So for me, the answer for long-term stuff is seller financing. I'm comfortable with the seller being my bank for all or portion of the deal. Sub-2 has always made me nervous, probably because of all these corner cases that could happen that freak me out. But I do like the idea of doing a straight up sub-2, like 6 months, because you're going to buy a dump or something that needs work. You don't have the cash to pay them off, but if you can build in the equity with your team and then get them out, I think that is a nice subtle tweak that is just enough to make me feel comfortable. Because again, it's the term, right? If it's 3 months, it's 6 months. Again, you can.
Well, let's talk about the long term. So what makes you uncomfortable?
Well, again, I just don't know what I don't know yet, right? Again, right? You take it over sub-2, they got 2.7%. I stick a renter in there. 12 years later, that person goes through bankruptcy. The note is still there.
You just need to be prepared to pay the house off, to pay the loan off.
Okay.
So there is no downside. Your worst downside is you have to refinance or you have to pay them off. So as long as you have the ability to do that. So if hey, I can get a loan. If this gets triggered, if the bank calls it, if they go bankrupt, whatever it is, You just need to have the ability to pay
The
it
worst,
off.
so the worst case scenario, you have to, again, I always say, right, if I want to know what the downside is, and I'm okay with that, we're good. So, okay. So
Exactly.
the worst downside is you take over a 200K loan. Something gets triggered, either bankruptcy or the bank or whatever. As long as I could stroke a check or have the credit and cash to do a refi at today's rates, no big deal.
Yeah, you just got to be able to pay that loan off. So you're not taking over the loan.
Right,
So
right.
just to be clear, because there is somebody out there, and I'll just say it. So Pace Morby in his ads, and he says you're taking over the house or taking over the loan. You're not taking over the loan. You're taking title to the house
and payments.
The loan stays in place with the seller, with the owner. You're just making the payments. You're not taking anything over. You're making the payments. You're getting title to the property. And that does trigger technical default.
Right.
And the worst case scenario is the bank calls the loan, seller goes bankrupt, and something happens and the house gets caught up in bankruptcy. Well, that could be something that takes a while, but eventually the loan will need to get paid off. So you just have to be prepared to be able to do that if that happens. That's your worst case scenario.
Okay.
It's totally legal. Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, it's on
the loan covenants, which, by the way, if you ever read your loan in detail, they could call your loan for all kinds of stupid stuff. If you spell your name wrong or whatever, if you lose your job, technically you're in technical default, they could call your loan.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, again, one of the things that I know is coming is I think the real estate market is up for the biggest crash ever. I do think it's in transactions, not price. I don't think there's any chance that my market falls 75%, like 0%, but transactions can fall 50%.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's the biggest ever. So if you go back to 0809, transactions crashed back then.
Yeah. So again, I've looked at it. Transactions peak to trough, new housing, new construction, 75%. Existing home sales only crashed 42% because everything was sold, foreclosures and short sales, and those counted as transactions.
Yeah. So yeah, the new construction number could be skewed because again, there's institutional buyers out there. So if you're a national home builder and you've got 1,000 homes, all of a sudden there's no transactions, you just sell them all to an investor.
Yeah, you're done. It counts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the other thing about the 06 crisis is we were building like never before. I think it was 1.3 million was the peak in 06, and we went all the way down to 300 grand, like 363. It was a crash.
Yeah. And there's a lot of units in the pipeline, but starts are way down. So builders are not starting anything right now. But the good news is, lumber prices are coming down. All of that stuff will start to correct a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to build an ADU. Lumber's coming down. I'm going to build an ADU.
Yeah. So all this stuff, that's the positive side of all these corrections is prices will correct, everything will correct, and stuff will reset. And again, we've seen it over and over. In real estate, it's every 15 years plus or minus that you see these peaks and valleys, and things can delay it with the Fed intervention and stuff like that. But what's interesting about this time around is that, the mortgage market is so healthy. You have the institutional buyers. So it'll be interesting to see, how quickly, if we get to 6%, how quickly things just shut off. And here's the perfect scenario. So summer is always the slowest time for housing market anyways, in the United States. Summer is always your slowest time. Transactions fall, everything falls in the summer. If you get rates going to 6%, it could be crickets like it was in 0809, which could be a good opportunity for inventory levels to build. Because a lot of people will list in the summer because they're traveling and doing stuff, and it's a good time to show. So, that could really help, bring the correction about a lot quicker in the housing market. But, the key is, be ready for these strategies because there's going to be a lot of people that may want to sell or may need to sell, but they can't traditionally because they don't have the equity or the ability. So if you can come in with these creative structures, either owner finance, subject to, lease option, master lease. So you can come in, and that's another thing. Instead of taking the mortgage over and doing all that, you can just say, look, I'll lease the house from you for 30 years or whatever. You can get a long-term lease and just lease it and don't take the mortgage over. Don't do all that, but you're relying on them to make the payments,
Yeah, you would probably have a servicer in between you, but yeah.
Well, not if you're just doing a lease, because you'd be paying the owner directly. You just want to make sure they give you evidence that they're making the mortgage payments. So your lease would be contingent upon that. And, you'd want to be in a position again, if you're doing this as an owner occupant, you'd want to be in a position or even investment property that you can pay it off if they somehow default on a master lease. But those are big in commercial as well, doing master leases. When you lease a building, co-working space, and you sublet out parts or pieces or the whole space to another tenant. So you can do that in residential too and live in it and rent it and do whatever.
That's amazing. It's going to be, again, what you and I talk about is understanding what's coming, appreciating the negative headlines, knowing it's going to be probably years in the making, but also getting ready and prepared. Because again, true wealth is made in bear markets and recessions. And if you're getting ready for it, it's going to be a good time. So Greg, where can people find you?
Yeah, gregdickerson.com. All my info's there, links to my YouTube channel and everything. Go check it out.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.